The Mars Climate Orbiter. On September 23, 1999, engineers at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California gathered in a mission control room. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. They were monitoring the Mars Climate Orbiter, a $125 million robotic space probe that had traveled over 400 million miles to study the Martian climate. The probe was about to perform its most critical maneuver, firing its main engine for 12 minutes to slow down and be captured by Mars's gravity. The engine burn began as planned. The spacecraft then passed behind the planet, temporarily cutting off its signal to Earth. This was expected. The engineers waited. The probe was scheduled to re-emerge from behind Mars and re-establish contact, but the minutes ticked by in heavy silence. On the screens, telemetry data was replaced by a flat line. The signal never came. The Mars Climate Orbiter was gone. A frantic investigation began, forming a mishap investigation board to pore over months of navigational data. They discovered something astonishing. A mistake so simple it was almost comical. The software that controlled the spacecraft's thrusters, built by contractor Lockheed Martin in Colorado, calculated force in imperial units of pound-seconds. However, the software used by the NASA navigation team in California expected those numbers to be in the metric unit of Newton-seconds. A pound of force is about 4.45 times stronger than a Newton. For 9 months, every time the probe made a course correction, it was being pushed 4.45 times harder than NASA's computers believed. The tiny error compounded with each maneuver, pushing the probe further and further off its intended course. This was a direct result of NASA's faster, better, cheaper mantra at the time, which led to less rigorous oversight between teams. Instead of approaching Mars at a safe altitude of 140 kilometers, the probe came in far too low, at a suicidal altitude of just 57 kilometers. It entered the upper Martian atmosphere at a steep angle. Traveling at over 12,000 miles per hour, the delicate probe was torn apart and incinerated by atmospheric friction and heat. The entire mission was lost due to a basic unit conversion error that no one had caught. The total cost of the mission, including development and launch, was over $327 million. The failure became a legendary case study in engineering and project management, a catastrophic lesson on the importance of double-checking your math. The Night Capital Glitch. On August 1, 2012, at 9:30 a.m., the opening bell rang at the New York Stock Exchange. For the high-frequency trading firm Knight Capital Group, it was supposed to be a routine day. The company had just installed new trading software designed to execute millions of automated trades with lightning speed. But one technician had made a critical error during the rollout. While deploying the new software across the company's 8 main computer servers, he failed to copy it to one of them. On that one server, an old dormant piece of code was accidentally reactivated. This obsolete algorithm was a test function nicknamed PowerPeg, which was designed to buy and sell large blocks of stock but had never been fully removed. Its purpose in the live market was now completely defunct. The moment the market opened, the rogue algorithm unleashed chaos. It began sending a blizzard of erratic orders, buying up millions of shares in 148 different companies at the asking price, and immediately selling them at the bid price, losing a few cents on every single transaction. But it was doing this thousands of times per second. Traders on the floor of the stock exchange stared at their screens in disbelief as normally stable stocks began to swing wildly in price for no apparent reason. The firm's own systems were poisoning the market. Alarms began to sound within Knight Capital as they watched their systems hemorrhage cash, but they couldn't just pull the plug. The system was too complex. It took 45 agonizing minutes for engineers to locate the faulty server and shut the system down. In those 45 minutes, the algorithm had executed over 4 million trades and lost the company $440 million. The firm, which had been valued at over $1 billion, was pushed to the brink of bankruptcy before 10:30 a.m. They were losing $10 million a minute. They were forced to seek a last-minute bailout from rival firms, which saved them from immediate collapse but required them to sell the company at a fraction of its former value. The incident became a terrifying example of how a single human error in a complex technological system could create a financial catastrophe in minutes. The Alaska Purchase. On March 30, 1867, representatives from the Russian Empire and the United States finalized a historic deal in the middle of the night. Russia, crippled by debt from the recent Crimean War and fearing its powerful rival Great Britain might seize its North American territory by force, agreed to sell Alaska to the United States. The price was $7.2 million. The Tsar, Alexander II, viewed Alaska as a remote, unprofitable, and indefensible piece of land. The Russian-American company that managed it was losing money, and the Tsar considered the sale a prudent way to cut his losses and get some much-needed cash before the British Royal Navy simply took it. The mistake was one of catastrophic misjudgment. The final price for the 586,000 square mile territory amounted to about 2 cents per acre. In the United States, the purchase was widely ridiculed. When the American public awoke to the news, the reaction was not celebration but outrage. Critics called it Seward's folly after Secretary of State William H. Seward, who had championed the deal. The press mocked the new territory as Seward's icebox and a polar bear garden, convinced that the government had wasted millions on a worthless wasteland of ice and rock. The New York Tribune called it a sucked orange, a territory already stripped of its value. The perception of the deal began to change just a few decades later. In 1896, the Clyde Gold Rush began and billions of dollars in gold were extracted from the region. But the true value was discovered in the 20th century. In 1968, the Prudhoe Bay oil field was discovered in Alaska, which turned out to be the largest oil field in North American history. The oil, natural gas, timber, and mineral resources of Alaska are now estimated to be worth trillions of dollars. For Russia, selling the territory for pennies an acre became one of the worst financial blunders a nation has ever made, a mistake of incomprehensible scale. The Kodak moment. In December of 1975, a 24-year-old engineer at Eastman Kodak named Steve Sasson created a device that would change the world. He invented the first ever portable digital camera. The device was the size of a toaster, weighed 8 pounds, and took 23 seconds to capture a single 0.01 megapixel black and white image onto a cassette tape. When he presented his invention to Kodak's executives, their reaction was one of curiosity mixed with fear. He recalled one executive saying, "That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." The executive's mistake was not in failing to see the potential of the technology, but in seeing it too clearly. Kodak was a corporate giant whose entire business model was a razor and blades model, sell cheap cameras and make a fortune on the film, photographic paper, and developing chemicals. The digital camera threatened every single one of their profitable revenue streams. The idea of a filmless camera was not just a threat to their profits, it was a threat to their very identity. Instead of embracing the new technology and leading the digital revolution, Kodak's leadership made a fateful decision. They buried it. They patented Sasson's invention but largely kept it on the shelf, treating it as a distant threat rather than the future of the company. Their internal report grimly predicted it could take years to become viable, giving them a false sense of security. For the next 2 decades, Kodak continued to focus on its film business while competitors like Sony, Fujifilm, and Canon aggressively pursued digital technology. When the digital wave finally hit the consumer market in the late 1990s, Kodak was woefully unprepared. They tried to play catch-up, but it was too late. Their film sales collapsed. The company that had once been synonymous with photography found itself an irrelevant relic. After years of massive losses, Eastman Kodak filed for bankruptcy in 2012. The mistake of ignoring their own invention didn't cost them millions. It cost them the entire company. The Walkie-Talkie skyscraper. In the spring of 2013, a new skyscraper at 20 Fenchurch Street was nearing completion in the heart of London. The building, nicknamed the Walkie-Talkie for its distinctive shape, featured a unique concave design that curved outwards towards the top. The architect Raphael Vignoli had designed it to maximize floor space on the upper levels. But this design contained a catastrophic engineering flaw that no one had foreseen. The massive south-facing curved glass facade acted like a giant parabolic mirror. It collected the sun's rays and focused them into a single concentrated beam onto the street below. The mistake became apparent during a summer heatwave. The focused beam of light was incredibly intense, with temperatures inside the beam measured at over 240 degrees Fahrenheit. It began to cause tangible damage. A Jaguar XJ parked on the street had its panels warped and its side mirror melted. The owner returned to find his car smelling of burning plastic. Pedestrians reported feeling an unusual blast of heat as they walked through the beam. A local barber said the intense light had burned a hole in his shop's welcome mat. Journalists demonstrated the beam's power by frying an egg in a pan placed on the sidewalk. The skyscraper had effectively become a death ray. The area on the street where the beam fell was nicknamed the Fry Scraper and had to be cordoned off by police. The consequence was a public relations nightmare and a costly engineering problem. The developers were forced to pay for the damage to the melted car and affected businesses. To fix the problem permanently, they had to spend millions of pounds to design and install a massive permanent sunshade structure of horizontal aluminum fins across the face of the building to diffuse the sunlight. The mistake turned a landmark piece of architecture into a public laughingstock and a multi-million-dollar lesson in the unintended consequences of design. The Decca Records rejection. On January 1st, 1962, a young four-piece band from Liverpool arrived in London for the most important audition of their lives. The band, called the Beatles, played a 15-song set for executives at Decca Records, one of Britain's leading record labels. The A&R executive in charge of the decision was a man named Dick Rowe. After listening to the audition tapes, he made his choice. He decided to sign another band they had auditioned that day, Brian Poole and the Tremeloes. Part of his reasoning was practical. The Tremeloes were based in London, while the Beatles were from Liverpool, making them seem like a bigger logistical risk. Rowe's primary mistake, however, was his reasoning about the music itself. He famously told the Beatles' manager, Brian Epstein, "Guitar groups are on the way out." He genuinely believed the future of music lay with solo vocalists like Cliff Richard, not four-piece rock bands. He rejected the Beatles, sending them back to Liverpool. After the rejection, their manager Brian Epstein refused to give up. He took the tapes to a record shop and had them pressed onto a disc, a move that would eventually lead him to the EMI producer George Martin, the man who would finally see their potential and say yes. The consequence for Decca Records was an opportunity cost of staggering proportions. The Beatles went on to become the best-selling musical act of all time, selling over 600 million records and generating billions of dollars in revenue. They spearheaded a cultural revolution that Decca had the chance to lead but passed on. Dick Rowe, despite having a successful career and later signing other major acts like the Rolling Stones, partly to atone for his error, was forever haunted by the decision. The rejection of the Beatles is not a story of a direct financial loss, but of a colossal misreading of the future, a failure of vision that cost a company a fortune beyond imagination.